Well, greetings everyone, and once again, welcome to another Monday evening up to an imperfect union, presented by the political conscience of West Coast Steeler fan. Um, as you can see on the bottom, I am J.E. King 3, also known as West Coast Steeler fan on Twitter and a few other social medias. Uh, you can find our show here on Facebook and on YouTube. Uh, please go to our YouTube channel, subscribe, and donate. And you can donate our Cash App there, $JE King 3. Um, all subscriptions and donations go to, furthering our podcasts as well as uh, our social media pages. With that being said, today we, of course, have more shootings, and it seems like this is America's answer, of course, to the violence, with more violence. And of course, uh, uh, we have seen that the Republican response, of course, is that we need more guns. We need more guns in order for us to de escalate the use of guns. All right. Anyway, there are a few things that I wanted to talk about this evening. And one, the world is still reeling from Ye and his remarks as well, a lot of his remarks, but especially the ones that in where he mentioned Jews very specifically. We have seen demonstrations here in LA um, where we have uh, white nationalists, or at least people that seem to believe that Jews are to blame for the problems, demonstrating in LA. And I'm sure we will hear more of the outlet about these remarks and the impact that it has had in the Jewish community as well as the Black community. And there, of course, has been the financial backlash since he made these remarks. Should Adidas withdraw their support? And just like some of the other sports figures that we have talked about, and some of their more controversial remarks, um, should some of these companies um, back off their commercial endorsements as well as their merchandise. And this has seemed to be something that has really plagued uh, the commercial uh, uh, responsibility of these companies when you have um, individuals that represent their brand suddenly speak out in terms that the company is not endorsed. Um, Colin Kaepernick would be a one example, as we have seen how much money he lost, and how there was an immediate uh, uh, commercial response to make sure um, that this man was no longer employable, and that he was severely punished from the capitalistic point of view, regardless of how many people uh, wanted or understood what his platform was. Um, those of you that have watched this program know that there has been controversy on both sides, because I did invite some conservatives on the show when this was happening during 45's administration, and we had some very heated conversations. But there were some comments made during an interview with Piers Morgan, uh, in which he invited two um, Fox commentators, uh, and was asking them about Kanye's um, remarks, and should he apologize to the Jewish community. um, I sent a copy of the video to some of the people that usually appear on the panel. And this video takes, I think it's a little over 13 minutes and 5 seconds. And the first 8 minutes is kind of jostling with Kanye, and listening to a lot of gibberish, and then uh, Kanye acquiesces to their requests, and says that maybe he should apologize because he wasn't not lumping all uh, people of Jewish ancestry within the same uh, envelope. He was just talking about the business part. So then we have a gentleman that carries around this second, I don't know, maybe it's even a third tier. I haven't even seen what kind of uh, champion. I mean, this man at his age still has some kind of narcissistic complex about what a great athlete he has been. Bro, that's not real wrestling. We all know that that was acting, basically. It was, for all and purposes, controlled chaos. But anyway, this guy walks around, as if, um, he uh, was the heavyweight champ of the world. I mean, I, do you even have Dana White's phone number? I mean, were you ever considered a professional athlete of any type? But anyway, um, he comes on and tells peers about how patient he was, and uh, how he handled Kanye with kid gloves, uh, it was a lot of backslapping and whatnot. Um, and then he brought on Gene Simmons. Gene Simmons, the lead man for uh, a rock group. A lot of you may remember uh, uh, Gene with the platform heels and uh, the makeup and all the things associated with the rock band. But he said something very specific. And the specific quote was, I want to make sure I get this right because even though I didn't copy it word for word, uh, I kind of paraphrased it. And if you want to go to the exact words, you can go to uh, the video and start at the 10-minute 30-second, 10 minutes 30-second part of it. And Gene was talking about the struggle of African Americans. And he said it went back hundreds, even thousands of years. But if you really want to know about struggles, Jews have been persecuted for thousands of years. It goes back to the Bible, which our people wrote and gave to the rest of you guys. Jews have done well because they worked for it. Should I read this again? Okay. Jews have been persecuted for thousands of years. It goes back to the Bible, which our people, because Gene Simmons says he's of Jewish descent, which our people wrote and gave to the rest of you guys. Jews have done well because they worked for it. You can substitute that for white if you'd like. because that is what white supremacists also use. Our people have been prosecuted and persecuted for thousands of years just because we're white. And white people have done well because they work for it rather than you other people that always have your hand out. So I'm thinking, does this interview actually demonstrate how certain groups can get away with saying things and there be no repercussions, and why there's a discussion every time another group says this? Because the last that I looked on the front of my Bible, it said the King James Version. I've also seen some, uh, uh, the Book of Mormon. Um, I've also seen people that are on known white supremacist sites say things that were just as. I mean, think of this. It's just, okay. There are a number of Christians that trace their heritage back to the Ethiopian church. And think of one group stating that they wrote the Bible and gave it to the rest of you guys. Now, I mean, maybe, okay, maybe it's just me and I'm being extra sensitive and there is no arrogance involved here. But all of the disciples weren't Jewish. And there are so many books in the Bible that a lot of people claim that the Bible was written in Greek and Hebrew. So, knowing how I feel about religion, when you have someone that thinks that they are the sole creator of the biblical experience. Either he is not versed in many of the aspects of the Bible because it um, it's also documented that some of the people that wrote the Bible were less than perfect. And if you feel that Kanye's remarks were out of were just out of, I don't know, would you say context or uh, it seems to me that there should have been just as much backlash for Gene Simmons making this statement as there was for Kanye making his statement about the Jewish entertainment industry. Now, I'm certainly not someone that supports Kanye in any type of way or form. And if I had, the final straw would have been Candace Owens. So when I would like to get the um, I would like to know what the what our guests think about this comment. Second of all, uh, America's report card has showed that there's a marked decrease in math and reading skills in the fourth and eighth grade levels. Uh, and the numbers are the worst since the 1990s. And we've all talked about the effect of not being able to go to school, interact with their peers, and what the impact that this has had uh, on our children. But while there has been a marked decrease in math and reading skills, in the eighth grade, uh, if you look at the numbers for the eighth grade for eighth graders, actually sixth grade and above, um, there has been a marked increase in the actual video usage, especially among those in the gaming community. Now, I'm sure we've all seen uh, these uh, young kids uh, being babysit by their computers. Um, and I'm not saying that this is particular to one community or another. But if you look at uh, and these are things you can see for your eyes. I mean, if you're standing anywhere near to a kid's bus stop when they're picking up or dropping off, you see all these little kids with their little computers. You see a lot of them that already have iPhones. And we've talked to teachers on this show that have conducted video classes. And one of the biggest complaints is that the kids will turn on the video cast, check in, and then go about their business or put them on mute or whatever. And I guess what I'm saying here is that kids will learn things that they consider important. But remember, you're dealing with the mind of a child. So you have to you need those certain bells and whistles and things to keep their attention. And you have to you have to find a way to spark that creative side. Um, as I've mentioned, you have a lot of musicians and people in the entertainment industry uh, that can do well with musical equipment and rearranging and all these type of things, but they don't know how to fill out a resume. So how would you work to restore that creative mindness, that creativeness, or that thirst for knowledge uh, within a kid, excuse me, within a child, when it's much easier for him to connect with a video game and play with his partners, with his elders. I mean, with his contemporaries. You know, what would you rather do if you were a child? Study this, algebra homework, or play Call of Duty with your friends. So I I like to go back to some of the original programs and why they are still around. Sesame Street, for example. Uh, uh, Shows like Mr. Rogers and uh, learning to count, uh, different school books for these kids. And I think if and we have to be smart enough to do this, people. Uh, if there's a hope for our future, we have to start finding a way to embrace these kids and their creativity, much like our grandparents and grandparents had to do with us. Um, as I don't want to say that we have to eat crow or uh, well, in some days, in a lot of cases, we do because we are more responsible for what's happened to uh, our country, our population, than anyone else. As I said, a lot of these communities have had the same problems for the last 50 years because of the complacency of the elders in the community. We went along to get along, and now we're reaping the benefits of that. Um, there was another uh, thing that I wanted to discuss uh, on tonight's show, and this was civil liberties, no, civil rights backslash civil liberties. Are they two different things? So I went to Wikipedia and I looked up the definitions of both, and I was just I see Mr. Scott is here. Uh, Good evening, Mr. Scott. How are you doing this evening?
Greetings, greetings. Doing very well.
I don't know. You look like you bundled up there. Is the snow come in yet?
No, no, not yet, but
Huh?
it's on the way. It's on the way.
But just say it's on the way. It's on the way. Uh, how was your week, man? Your your twins were just as disappointing as my Yankees in the end.
Oh boy, my Yankees. When you
Were-
build your offense and you just want to hit home runs, that's the only offense you have. That was just terrible. This very pitiful display by the Yankees.
Well, I mean, hey, but that's the Yankees have always been known for their bats, and I asked the question earlier in the series, who was going to win this that series? Was it going to be the Sticks, meaning the Yankees, or was it going to be the Stones? Meaning that the Astros pitching was going to win out in the end, and that's kind of the way it turned out. So but hey, my Padres got to at least do one round, so they're just as good as the Yankees in that respect. But congratulations to the young men out here, and uh, you know, uh, but do you think Mr. Judge will be a Yankee next season?
It's kind of hard to say. It's kind of hard to say. When you get booed, sometimes booing. The guy says, "Well, maybe I need to pack my bags." I would hope that he would be there. I mean, he should be a fixture. I mean, he should be a fixture out there. But money talks, and these contracts are so funny right now. It's going to be interesting. I hope he stays there, though.
Yeah. Well, if it's money, that's something that they certainly can match. But I don't know. Exchanging one side of New York for the other side of New York, you know. Hey. But anyway, Mr. Scott, I was uh, talking about a few things. One of them being your favorite gentleman, Mr. Ye, and the big backlash that he had got about his anti-Semitic remarks. In fact, we've had a few demonstrations out here in California. Uh, People, having signs over the bridge, and I'm sure there are other, some things that have went kind of under the curtain. But did you get a chance to see the video that I had sent earlier about the uh, interview with Pierce Morgan?
I don't, no, I didn't get a chance to. I don't think I saw that.
Well, I want to read you an excerpt, but if you get a chance to watch the video, you don't have to watch it all. Uh, I did put a mark where the particular remarks that I'm referring to started. The video is 13 minutes and 5 seconds, or 13:10, something like that. But these particular remarks started at the 10-minute 30-second mark. And I'm just going to read this to you here. When speaking about what had happened, you had Gene Simmons on. I'm pretty sure you know who Gene Simmons is, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Gene, when speaking about his Jewish heritage, Gene said that Jews, while he did give black people and brown people credit for the hundreds and of years that we have been through it, he said that Jews have been persecuted for thousands of years. It goes back to the Bible, which our people wrote and gave to the rest of you guys. Jews have done well because they worked for it. What's your thoughts on that, Mr. Scott?
Well, my thoughts, first of all, in regards to whatever he calls himself, ye, yay, yo, whatever you want to call it, so that people waste their time listening to people with that little intellect. I mean, this is a whole facade. This guy is like a cardboard cutout of a person, if you ask me. And so, why would you even listen to what? Well, who cares what he thinks? What he? I mean, that's
Well,
just
you know,
totally
I,
ridiculous.
I wasn't so much concerned as to what he says as to when Gene Simmons says Jews have been persecuted for thousands of years,
Well, for him,
which
his
which
perspective.
goes back to the Bible, which our people wrote and gave to the rest of you guys.
Yeah.
Well, on my I mean, maybe on maybe your Bible is different, but my Bible says King James version.
That's all true. And I guess, this thing, it always comes down to the perspectives. It's everybody wants to have their version of what happened, and but since we weren't there, we weren't there. So, but I mean, as far as me regurgitating or even responding to anything from a ye or whatever whatever that gentleman is, it's just it's madness. And what Simmons says, I mean, he that's his perspective on it. I mean, is it true? Is it there seems to be some truth to it, but when we go back to prehistoric times before documentation, And then when you got your Constantines and your King James, I mean, the versions we're getting, we have to take this stuff, all of it, with a grain of salt. To me, I mean, I don't know. Man's conflicts are usually, at the end of the day, they're not even sure why they bothered to even do it. I mean, but this madness continues, and you'd hope, by learning and following history and learning the mistakes and the things that have already happened, to not step in that hole again, but they still continue to step in it. So I don't know, James. But as you know, the rap game and all of that foolishness. I think it's just been a great deterioration of our culture, and he's at the top of it. So he might be running for office before we. I mean, when they can throw up a Herschel Walker, they can, they I could see Yee being.
Well, before he had his marital conflicts and all that, he had said he was going to run for president after Trump,
Yeah, I had heard that.
and so I mean, it I guess it can shows how dangerous people are with money that don't have common sense. You know, businessmen and things like that. The man has done wonders, but sometimes one and one is just two. No matter how brilliant you are, you just can't make one and one into three. It just doesn't work.
Well, I understand that he's been losing some endorsements. That some people have come out and says that they're not going to endorse his products. So
Well, Adidas has come out, and they've been uh, the stockholders and others have said that they think that his endorsement should be canceled, and you know uh, that would probably be one way to do it. Back in the old days, as you know, Mr. Scott, we used to call them a boycott. Well, I don't know. Maybe that's not the politically correct term nowadays, but I mean, it didn't take him but one hot minute to make sure that Colin Kaepernick wasn't going to make any money with his endorsements. I think he knelt on Sunday, and by Monday, his locker was empty, and the refrigerator, all the juice, energy drinks, it was taken out the fridge, and you know. Uh, he was a man of as a matter of fact, there was probably some pimps that was treated better than he was, at that particular time. But it just does it seem to me that you know we we all we all want to, and I'm not a Ye fan either, but it just seemed how uh, so blind people were when you were on a program asking this man not to be anti-Semitic, and you have a Semitic that comes on and practically tells you that you're a second-class citizen.
well, in regards to Kaepernick, I mean, he's not the only one. He's not the only one that did something like that. There were other football players that didn't stand. There was other football players. There was other athletes that did.
LeBron took a knee.
Yeah,
Nobody threw it.
that's what I'm saying. There's other. He's not the only one to do it, but he became some kind of a symbol or something unto it, and they just punished him, to infinitum, ruined his career, can't play no more. Nobody won't touch him. He's blackballed from the league. But like I say, he's not the only one to do this. And then the Kanye, well, why does Adidas decide to drop him? So does Adidas have something personal with what he said about the Jewish people? Is it, if he had said it about some other people, would they have done the same? I mean, I don't know what. the exact motivation is, what they're, why they're doing it, just to say that we don't like that kind of language, or we don't like you to. I mean, he just made some statements. Made some statements.
Adidas is a Jewish owned company. So I mean that I mean that's one way to look at it. But
Yeah, well, okay,
you know,
okay.
but which kind of brings me back to another aspect when you're talking about people that tend to stick together and work together, and this is something that has always been a stereotype of the Jewish people. That they work hard and they practice the Torah. I mean, the whole 9 yards. Uh, how they're a community unto to themselves, and that's kind of the way that they like it. But when most races do that, they're called uh, radical. You only want your kids to go to a certain school. You only want them to eat a certain type of food. Uh, eh, do you think that it's easier to get a pass when you're a white ethnic group than it is when you're a black ethnic group?
Well, I mean, that's a course. Of course there is. And the Jewish people have historically, at least, growing up in the neighborhood, I mean, they had they had the monopoly on the candy. They had the little candy, had little candy stores. And as I think about it, from the candy store about 2 blocks down the road was a dentist, and he and he was a dentist, and he was Jewish dentist. So they sell feed us with all this sugary candy, Sputniks, and we could get two for a penny back then. They could just load you up. If you had 25 cents back then, man, you could come out with pocketfuls of candy. And
And yet,
so,
at least two of them little brown bags. I remember the Mary Janes and what was the little coconut ones. Uh, I think they were pink, brown, and white. Hey, I was a candy man.
same here, same here. But they you know, marketed, and they had the candy. The dentist was there. The lawyers were there. They in the community, but our communities did the same thing, but they destroy our communities. See, they destroy ours. All the
Miss
cities,
Sims,
everywhere, they destroy.
Miss Sims, how are you this evening?
Present and accounted for as usual.
uh, 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 Miss Hills, I'm gonna start forwarding some of them letters you be sending me. So, I mean, I'm telling you, I want y'all to know, boy, hey, Miss Sims deals me a lot of abuse here now, but I'm gonna take it with a grain of salt, but
That's
but
to that's to help that's to help keep you from wasting your mind. Like I keep saying, you said your age. Mine is a terrible thing to waste, James.
I'm a little more worried about my body right now, Miss Sims. But did you get a chance to watch the video that I sent you?
Yes.
Okay. Did you get to the part where I was talking about Mr. Simmons rather, and how he said that uh, the uh, uh, the Jewish people were, you know,
Yep,
so
I get that. Uh-huh.
okay. What did you think about those remarks?
Well, James, can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Responding to this one, I had to think about it because number one, I didn't want to feed into this young man being used or allow himself to be used for attention and monetary gain. But then I thought about, well, in doing that, out of respect for you, James, and because what's going on, I think is doing damage. I said I did spend some time on it, and I even wrote them down some things that I had come up with uh, doing that, and so let me. I'll go down my list that I had kind of created in regards to your question, your responses. Why are the remarks being scrutinized? And then first thing that came to my mind was that we got to remember that in regards to specifically the time period on the timeline and the man, I think it's Simmons, the last name, spoke. Sometimes we have to remember how you say something is just as important as sometimes it's what you say. And then in looking at what he was saying, I think that I think that played into how people were hearing what he said and didn't say. Then I thought about, okay, he in his remarks he left out several issues and things that I think requires one to think about what he had said, and he in leaving them out that required you, the whoever was watching, to fill in the blanks, or required you to think about what it was saying, what was being said. Okay, and in doing that, you have to remember about in thinking about what was being said. You have to remember that this is for me. Now, this is coming from my perspective. That during the time period that he's speaking of historically, there were Black Jews living and included in the historical timeline that he spoke to. And even today, Jews continue to be persecuted and resented, including Black Jews, even today, as Blacks are. Then I thought about today, still in the general public's mind, James, including Christians, tend not to think about or realize that the connections that intentionally or unintentionally that Jesus was a Jew. The Bible is written by Jewish authors. I can't remember if the complete Bible was written by Jewish people. And then you have to think about the first followers of Jesus Christ were Jews. Back then, they were called believers or followers of Christ, and it was later that the Gentiles, other than Jews, were introduced and incorporated into the believers and followers of Christ. And even after the Old Testament, Jewish authors continue to write the Bible's New Testament. And I think at this time, other things are coming into play also in regards to where the general public's mind and thinking is, James. There's people still today that don't as an example, don't realize that Egypt is part of the continent of Africa, and that Africa is a continent, and that one of the things that in my in my career as an organizer in working with the Jewish community, and some of the things we've done, that I realized that, and they brought this to my attention, and some of the things that we do, that Jews have the ability of passing. 99% of Blacks don't have this ability. And when I say
Yeah,
passing,
yeah.
okay, I'm okay.
I wanted to, you have to elaborate that a little more to me when you say there's a rite of passage, because
Passing.
passing like dead. I mean, what do you mean by
No,
passing?
passing
Passing for
like,
white. Passing for white.
yeah, like Blacks did, were able to before even Nowadays, there are blacks who are very light complected, pass. One of the things that when I worked with the Jewish Community Actions, and we were basically dealing with 11th grade students after the regular school work. They came to community center and were taught various things, and we were working on racial justice issues. And one of the it was about 6 or 7 of us, and I was the only black person. But one of the black leaders said to questions. One of the questions to the 11th graders were, "When are times that you use your being Jewish, but that you use being strictly Jewish? Then when are the times that you use being white?" They knew what it was right away, and I hadn't thought of it like that. And they admitted that there were even school-age children uh, were presented opportunities, were in situations where they had figured out when it was best, just commit to just their being Jews and Jewish heritage. Then once they were in the various other cultures, white cultures, whatever, then it was they didn't necessarily come right out and say it, but there were times when they just maybe remained silent or just use the complexion of the skin to
But,
blend in,
but,
like
but
Mr. Scott has said.
they can take it a step further because
They
all of
could
these
change their
actors and
name.
all these people change their name. All these actors and all these this man is not named Dean Martin. This man is not named Jerry Lewis. This man is not named Frank Sinatra. They changed those names, changed their little hairstyle, changed the way they dress, so that they can fit into cultures that behooves them, that benefits them. They get into
Right.
situations that we
and,
can't we can't get into when we walk in. We can't do nothing about it. As long as I stay black, I'll be black. I mean, there's nothing I can do about that. Nothing, that's the way that is.
and
But
and
they
and, and,
can, yeah.
and
Then the
Sam
question, then the
and Sammy Davis Jr. found out, especially that him being Jewish did
That
not
still didn't
excuse
work.
him being black.
That still didn't
So
work.
so I can't go for that pass there because black Jews cannot pass for white Jews.
I didn't say that.
No, you said they
Here
had
again. I
no
should
no.
have. Okay, some of them I should have clarified. I was expecting you to use your brain cells here,
No,
James.
I use my brain cells because you specifically said that there are some black Jews and that there were black Jews, and then you went straight from there
Most of them.
to some of them are there's if you are black, just like I said when I spoke of two black men standing in an employment line, one is black, one is African. Until those two men speak up, both of those are just black men in line looking for a job.
And then I believe James, right after I said that, I said 99.9 blacks don't have that, aren't able to do that because of the skin complexion. That included black Jews also. And
Right.
then in regards to what tapping on to what Mr. Scott said in regards to how the Jewish community changed their names, etc., etc. Some, in my thinking, some of that comes into what do you do to survive? What do you do to survive whatever you feel that your oppressor is presenting to you in regards to we can personalize it personalize it in regards to what would I do or what as a culture we would do if if certain things presented themselves. And I can remember when I first back then when I was doing a lot of my community work. I was out there for a while, then I withdrew because my children were small and they needed my time, but for about a 2 year period. And then people found me, and one of the organizations that found me where I was and asked me to come back in was the Jewish Community Action folks. And so the first meeting I went to that they were having, the topic was how Jews became white. And I thought, well, wait a minute here. Here again is the mindset. Then I had to stop to think, well, in terms of my reading. And when I was younger, I said, yeah, there was a time when the Jewish community and the black community both were called dogs, and you can't enter here and you can't enter there, etc., etc. And then there came a period of time where Jews were accepted by the white culture, and they got jobs, etc., etc. And a lot of that, I think, the white or majority culture. This happened. One of the reasons I think this happened is because the whatever skills and knowledge and whatever that the Jewish community had, the white majority community needed at that time, and so they became white per se. And then afterwards, I even found books that said how the Irish became white, etc., etc. So that was in there too. A lot of people don't think about that or realize those things.
But
Yeah,
the whole thing is a color grid. It's a color grid because even today, I mean, you look at different cultures and different Hmong and Vietnamese, and
Hmm.
they'll have a name. They'll say, "My name is Jerry Vang. My name is Steve Chow." So how do they get the Anglo first name to go? See, that seems to be one of the tricks. Was switch your change your things too because they're lighter. And the thing is, the whole thing of skin color, just observationally, is what really spawns the whole idea. Because when I was in South Africa, you could see a whole hierarchy where the native black people in South Africa, they had the menial jobs. I didn't see anybody walking downtown with briefcases or suit on or anything black people. But then you would see people of, I don't know, Hindu or Iranian or light skinned people. Well, they're the managers at the nice hotel. They stand behind the counter and they do that. And we bust the tables. We're there busting tables and washing dishes and doing that. So
carrying the suitcases and
carrying the suitcases. It's a hierarchy thing. And I met a guy, I was talking to a guy at the hotel we happened to stay at because my sister was on a big deal over in South Africa, and me and my son went stayed at this hotel, and there was a guy there with had on a suit. I mean, a brother had on it wasn't like a regular suit; it was like a costume type suit, like he was really something, and he was selling candy. And so I talked to him, and he said he was from, I think he said Nigeria, and he's a medical doctor. But when he got to South, that's the selling that candy in that little vending thing. That's the only job he could get. And he said he is trained as a medical doctor, but he couldn't get no other jobs there. So it's still it's and over there, that apartheid just supposedly ended like 30, 40 years ago. But you can see a clear to look based on color, based on the color of your skin, at least what's visible that you can see. And I didn't see any native people. They were just hustling, trying to sell used clothes on the street, shining, doing anything that they could.
And I'm coming from my experiences. Number one, I really didn't coming from West Virginia, then Syracuse, and then here. I really did not have opportunity or experiences in regards to the Jewish population until I moved to Minneapolis. Then on eventually a few years after I moved here, I moved and I moved into a home. In the area that I moved into, I found out historically where the Jewish community lived before the '60s and whatever. All this area was the Jewish was occupied by the Jewish population, and through the years, I guess even before I came here, doing a lot of the civil rights area marches or whatever it was, they then moved into St. Louis Park. Is my understanding, and so I that was my first experience in regards to historically where I was live, who lived here before, etc., etc. And so I thought about that. I had to think about that. And then, as you were speaking, Mrs. Scott, in terms of the various ways that different uh, colors of skin of people are treated, I have to also factor in, from my experiences, that a lot of that you can't keep out of the conversation. A lot of that is due to the U.S. immigration policies, the U.S. Wall Street needing and using a lot of the immigrants even before they come into this country. Some of the things that immigrants are taught to say when they come here, then once they here, there's a structure in place to help move them along the process in regards to where they need to go. One of the things that one of my neighbors, Vivian Jenkins Nelson, how I first met her, she was having when she was at directly teaching at Augsburg, she was having sessions regarding Somali women and Black women, and I eventually went to one of the meetings and got to know the Somali women, etc., etc. And one of the things that they said that they were taught in these camps before they came here is to stay away from the blacks. The blacks, they were being indoctrinated even before they even saw a Black American, etc., etc., and that they were some of this. They were taught how to survive, how to be well. Sadly, be used also. And then I also, when someone brought that up, I say, well, here in America, some of us were said to stay away from the Somalis, etc., etc. So that was an example how the system and those in the system had pitted two cultures against each other in regards on the surface, while at the same time had plans and strategies in place to move or benefit one culture over the other. And even within the school system in the 90s and things like that, when my children were still in school, and that was the time that a lot of the Somali immigrants were coming into this country and into the school system. A lot of them were taught that they fill out applications. I heard it straight from the horse's mouth that when they fill out applications in terms of your race and stuff, don't put down Black or anything to do with African Americans or whatever. So a lot of them would put down white because they were going along with the power structure that said that they knew how to use and would be advanced in however they would uh, need to be in going further. Because back then, when I'm almost finished, back then within many of the school system, in money, a lot of the money was allocated towards Black children. And I think because the system, in order to filter in the immigrants coming from Africa, they wanted to combine everybody and just put them in to get the money, for the money, to follow the money trail and get as much money as they could. And the system wasn't structured as of yet to categorize people more. They want the system, in order to receive money for these students that were coming into the schools, were being classified as Blacks, etc., etc. But the Somalis themselves, once they got beyond that, they clearly identified with being Somali or whatever area of the countries of Africa that they came from, Nigerian, etc., etc. But in order to survive, they went along with the program that various, the system had taught them to do.
Yeah, but they can't put the Somali. They can't come in and fill out an application and say that they're white. I mean,
It didn't.
big old foreheads, long necks, buck teeth. I mean, it's that's filling out your that's forgery, or that would be some type of a
It's fraud.
That's fraud.
We're talking
Exactly. You
about
can't say you fill out the application and say you're white. I mean,
and and
we're
and,
talking James.
and Miss Sims, you got to remember now. This is somebody that's come home from the penitentiary. He had to go through the parole system. If I had put that I was white on an application and then went and stood up in front of the employee, do you know how fast my little black ass would have been down at the county jail?
I'm not going to even try to convince you all that what I'm saying happened because even the the staffs of the meetings that I was going to in the professional development committees that I was on, they were the ones that were saying this.
Yeah. I mean, we could use other, but not white.
James,
And then
James,
they'll ask you for an
I
explanation.
know it's
No,
blowing your mind.
I mean, no. I mean, remember, I'm your age now. And
Yeah.
so I mean, even going back to the Equal Opportunity Act, you couldn't put that you was white down on an application and then be considered for the job. As soon as you got in there, the first, excuse me, where's that white guy I'm looking for?
okay, but James, what if you're black, but you're adopted by two white people? You're adopted by two white people.
It,
You can say my
Oh, oh,
mother's
oh,
white, my
hold on,
father's
Mr. Scott.
white.
Hold on, Mr. Scott. Now, you've worked in child services. Uh, you know, I don't care. Your parents, the people that adopted you, maybe they are white. Maybe they came into the interview with you. Even, and this goes back even as far as high school when you talked about getting into gifted high schools, or you're talking about trying to get some special education. Those people can go down and advocate for you, but as soon once you get into that actual environment, you're still just another black kid.
James, yeah. I had a situation when I'm a supervisor, child protection, and I hired a girl because I wanted to get another sister in my unit. Okay, she's real light skinned, but I mean, I could look at her and she's a sister. So I'm in the meeting with the rest of the supervisors, and I said, "Yeah, I wanted to get another African American in my unit." And they're like, "Oh, she is African American? I didn't know." And so then I'm thinking, well, maybe she had a cover, but. And then I had a good friend. Actually, I still talk to him. A baseball fan. He used to be a coach, and he wrote a book on baseball. And his son played in college against the Twins. The spring training, he went down there big. And so we were talking about Aaron Judge, just like we were. And I said, "Yeah, boy," I said, "that brother can really." And he said, "You mean he's black?" I'm saying, well, so in his when he looks at him, he does not see him as a black man. Aaron Judge.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, hey, there are a lot of us, well, not of us, but there are a lot of light skinned people, light skinned black people that did not want to be known as black. I mean, we've all heard the stories of, people passing and whatnot. But no, and I'm not saying that it doesn't happen. But what I'm thinking, what I'm saying is those have to be very far and in between cases, because we are still not geared. The United States is still a nation that fears darkness, whether it's people, whether it's any time that there is something that is void of light, as they call it. There has always been some type of backlash. Uh, you know, uh, Raiders were called Nighthawks. You know, it you had people that waited until it was dark to put hoods over their faces, so they won't be recognized. But it seems now to me that we we have to either start accepting our blackness, or else that we will we will lose it. Like, and I use Kanye as an example, because the chances of every black man or woman in America all of a sudden become financially solvent, to me, is very slim to none. And uh, it, it seems like much of the work that brothers did before us, and I'm not saying that I agree with all of them, like Martin Luther King, or Father Divine, or Marcus Garvey. But what I am saying is that I think that instead of expanding our consciousness and exploring what to do in the future, we're all kind of content to say, well, let's wait and see. And I think we've had this wait and see concept for much too long. What do you think, Miss Sims?
Uh, two things. First, I want to say, Anthony's experience has an experience that I had on one of my jobs. At one time, I worked, for data entry operator. So I worked for various companies, and I did my community work in the evenings. But on one of my day jobs, I worked at International Multi Foods, and we'd have temporary people come in. And this temporary fellow came in, and he was very light skinned and complected. And in my mind, a lot of times black people recognize black people, etc., etc. But it came to my attention all of a sudden. I started hearing whispers among the white staff there that there's somebody here that's passing for white, but passing for white. And so it was fascinating for me to listen to the conversations that was going on among them, and the curiosity was so high, they didn't know what to do. I didn't give away the young man, and I wouldn't have, but they just couldn't. They were so curious to know who this person was passing for white, or maybe some of them thought that there wasn't the ability to pass for white. And back to what you were saying, James, in terms of in regards to various black population, we can't pass for white per se. A lot of us can't pass nowadays, and I spoke to that in my comments in terms of 99.9% of black folk, because of our complexion, aren't allowed that opportunity to go that way. But in what you were saying, one of the things uh, with this culture, the American culture, is a lot of times we our eyes, the first thing that we do, we see stuff, and a lot of us, our thoughts and process are based on what we see visually right away. And a lot of times, as things play themselves out, things aren't as we visually see them. And here again, and regarding one of the exercises I did when I worked with the Jewish uh, community action, I came up with a program to say, okay, in regards to black and racial things, let's do this. Let's put out the question: are you listening to your eyes? And what are they saying? And so when those students came in, there was like 6 staff. And so we put questions to them. There was me, I was younger and cuter at the time. There was an older gentleman that you could tell that he was from the Jewish community because he wore his yarmulke. There was someone, an unsighted person there. She was also Jewish, and she was unsighted and blind. Sometimes she had her dog with her or her stick, but what threw people off, she wasn't always blind. But what threw people off when they spoke to her, she would turn to them, and it was hard for people to realize that she was blind. So we asked the students a couple questions. Which one of us do you think is is uh is richer, has the more money? They said it was me because I took the leadership role. Which one of us is Jewish? They guessed wrong, and they've been saying these things over and over. The Us over and over for weeks at a time. But that was showing how people use their eyes, and they listen to their eyes first. What the eyes tell them, and a lot of times our visual impressions are wrong and incorrect. An example is that when on the podium in the 1968 Olympics, when the two black men were on the podiums and they raised their hands, I forget the name, but when you look at the picture, what do you see? And sometimes when you see a picture, you'll see a white fellow in there, and I think he was from Norway or something. Uh, you see the two black men raising their hands, the fists and things like that. But a lot of people don't realize that white person from, I think, Norway or Sweden played a part in those men's the presentation and image uh, that they showed in regards. He was the one that provided the gloves. He didn't have two pair of gloves, so if you notice, one wears a right and a left glove. A lot of times, even if the three of them are together on that podium, we only see the two black fellows. And I think when the young man went back to his native country, Sweden, or I think it was Sweden, he was ostracized. He was denigrated. And within the last couple years, I think the two black men, he passed away, and they were pallbearers at his funeral. This is within the last 10 years and so just those are just examples of how we visually, our eyes say one thing but our brains say another.
Um, Good evening, Mr. Williams.
Hey, all power to people, everyone.
Uh, Good having you on the conversation tonight. Uh, we were just talking about some of the topics that I had presented, and we were talking about Gene Simmons' remarks about how Jews had uh, been so benevolent as to give the rest of the world the Bible. Uh,
Right.
but I mean, my Bible still says King James version. Miss Sims hasn't addressed that part yet, but anyway, uh, what's your thoughts on that? You know, yeah, doesn't yours say King James version, Miss Sims? It don't say
one
the
of the
Jewish.
one,
It don't say
one
the
of the
Jewish version.
bibles
Uh, uh,
one
uh,
of the bibles one of the bibles that that I have says the King James Bible, and that's usually the one that's presented. Are you saying that King James wasn't
no,
Jewish?
no, he was not Jewish.
Okay.
By no means. The King of England has never been a Jew. You can look
And
that
didn't
up
I
in history.
and didn't I say within my comments that authors, I didn't say all authors of the Bible were Jewish. Some of them were Jewish, and especially as we go into the New Testament, things like that.
Uh,
Well,
So
let me get my take on it. Um, First, what I look at is you have to just really be able to recognize that if a person is addressing their position and their position as the absolute truth, that's where you have a problem because The bottom line with it is if you want to talk about the origins of the Bible, then it's going to predate the European involvement. And but if I'm going to erase all of African history as it applies to everything pre-slavery, which is position that Gene Simmons is coming from, then in essence, what he defines as a Jew would be of European heritage, and then from that standpoint, yes, in his interpretation, because he does is not aware of the history of how the Europeans received their civilization from the Africans. So if I want to ignore all of the prehistory in terms of Africa of Europeans before they came out of the Caucasus Mountains, then I will give credit to the ones that have hijacked the religion in terms of what's been called the Jews. And so that's the perspective he's coming from. And as long as I'm going to push that narrative on the world, especially from the standpoint of realizing that when we look in the United States, a minority is anything other than white male. Period. That anything other than a white man is a minority. So if I'm going to push a narrative, then and keep the people in ignorance and in darkness, then he's absolutely right with the way he's perspective. He's speaking from an entitlement point of view. He's speaking from a position of dealing with the world as it has been defined by those that are in control. And he was elusive on talking about who's in control. So he tried to be elusive on that whole standpoint and then basically couple it into the fact that, yeah, you can sprinkle in some truth in regards to Kanye needing some mental help. But the essence of what Kanye's getting at has to do with the fact of who controls the music industry and the entertainment industry. That is by bottom line Jewish that are running that. And he's speaking and he's only speaking on his truth. And from that standpoint, that's where he's getting that from, which even what Michael Jackson was referring back to that Gene tried to discredit or try to dismiss. They're talking about the ones that control the industry in which Kanye is a part of. That's why he's speaking. He's speaking on his experience of knowing that. Professor Griff spoke on that, and when Professor Griff tried to got invited to who what's his name? Damn, I'm forgetting his name now. The cat out of here that was from here from San Diego. Um, Cannon, Nick Cannon. I apologize for that. When he tried to speak on that on Nick Cannon's show, then they basically tried to bring Nick Cannon down because Professor Griff tried to speak on the truths of it. And there's plenty of documents you can read of like a book between the relationship between blacks and Jews. There's a lot of stuff that you can read that will tell you the exact same thing. Professor Griff spoke on how they control that industry, and they came against him, and that's when they kicked him out, attempted to get him kicked out of Public Enemy. And all Kanye is doing is because he's a billionaire, has the audacity to go ahead and speak the truth because he feel like they can't hurt him in that capacity. And that's the essence of that. So we have to understand there's multiple dynamics of conversations going on, right? I'm not giving Kanye credit for standing up to it because now that he is a billionaire, he can talk like that. But what I'm getting at is we have to draw a distinction between what's being said, why it's being said, and what is being interjected to try to neutralize the essence of the statement he making not being anti-Semitic because that's a ball of mess. When anytime you speak truth to power, all of a sudden you anti-Semitic. Kanye is not saying he hates Jews at no point. Neither did Professor Griff. Neither did anybody else that spoke the truth. Neither did Whoopi Goldberg when she said Jew is not a race. It is not a race. Where do we keep getting that from? That is not a race of people. There are no race of people called Jews. And that's all she stated. But guess what? Because she spoke the truth in that and didn't allow them to be elevated to a actual race of people, then all of a sudden she's anti-Semitic. So understanding how this anti-Semitic thing keeps getting thrown out there to try to make people feel guilty, and again to try to stumble us in our ability to recognize that no, yes, true indeed, what the Jews went through was horrific, but it does not compare to the Ma'afa. It does not compare to the centuries and of psychological and physical trauma and abuse that continues to happen against black people. Okay. And there's no comparison. But when you say that there's no comparison, then you're being anti-Semitic, and they're gonna come after you.
because they want to control the narrative.
and
See,
and,
that's what
and
it
they
comes
do
down.
control the narrative because they control the media, and
Yeah,
that's all we talking about. The entertainment industry is about the media. Okay. And the ones that control the media do happen to be Jews, and so from that standpoint they have that power. And so when anytime anybody speak against that power, they're going to get basically, put in this box and mislabeled, and psychological warfare is going to take place, and they're going to call you anti-Semitic, and now all of a sudden now you have to defend yourself from a quote unquote racist position instead of looking at the actual words that were stated and what you actually put out there. Again, I like to use Whoopi Goldberg as the best example because she did not say anything that was wrong, but they labeled her statement or even speaking against or even putting the word Jew in her mouth as anti-Semitic.
Well, before you came on, Robert, some of my comments were kind of similar to some of your comments that you started with in the beginning. I said that I had to really think about commenting on Kanye because I resented contributing to him being used, allowing himself to be used, or others using him to make a monetary gain. But I thought about it. Look, that I went beyond that because I thought him doing that and others doing that, they're doing damage in regards to putting stuff in people's mind and false information and whatever. And I said one of the things when Gene Simmons made his comments, he he left out some things that you really have to use your mind to think about it. And one of the things was even during the time period that he and timeline that he designated, there were black Jews back then, and things like that. And I I guess I'm not. I really can't go on and on with this conversation because to me, it's just falling into the strategy of the whole thing, and
Yeah,
I guess I refuse to do that.
right. One thing I want to do say real quick as well that I did not agree with is because of Kanye referring to himself as a billionaire, that gave him the authority to be able to discredit anybody else's knowledge because he's a billionaire. And that's some BS as well. Just because he is financially well off does not mean that he's the smartest person walking around on the planet. That is just an egotistical, narcissism is all that is. And so we have to see that for what that is. And again, when you have multiple angles and narratives all going on and jumbled up in one conversation, you get this ball of circus activity. And so, shame on him for feeling like simply because he is financially at a position to where he's very powerful in that regard, that he is the most know-it-all person and right about you know that perspective. So it, putting aside who he's talking to, just simply because you are worth a lot of money from that standpoint does not mean you have all of the knowledge.
Yeah, and I agree, and I put this under him allowing himself to be used and others using him when he does stuff like this, stuff like that.
Well, that's capitalism. That's how he became a
Yeah,
billionaire.
yeah.
Um, I had a question, and I'm going to read you a couple definitions here because it's about civil liberties versus civil rights. And let me get okay. Civil liberties are guarantees and freedoms that governments uh, commit not to abridge either by constitution, legislation, or judicial interpretation without due process. Through the scope of though the scope of the term difference between countries, civil liberties may include the freedom of consciousness, the freedom of press, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom to assemble, and the right to security and liberty, freedom of speech, the right to privacy, the right to equal treatment under the law, and due process, the right of a fair trial, and the right to life. Civil and political rights are classes of of rights that protect. Where I lost my place here. Okay, that protect individuals' freedom from infringement by government, social organizations, and private individuals. They ensure one's entitlement to participate in civil and political life of society and the state without discrimination or representation. Miss Sims, are these the same things?
Well, like you, James, I went and looked up the definition between the two with several definitions. And bottom line, when I came to simplify it, civil liberties protect you against the government, what the government might try to do to you. Civil rights is the government protect protecting you from harm that others might do to you. So liberties protect you from the government. Civil rights is the government now in a position for various means, whether it's legislation, protecting you against harm and other things that other people want to do to you. That's as simple as I could narrow it down to.
What do you think, Mr. Scott? What if the government's the one that's not keeping up its end of the bargain?
Well, these are some very nice words. I mean, and they all sound great. Just like, life, liberty, pursuit of men, all men create. All these things are so great, but we continue to get so. Wait till the policeman stops you. You know, wait till to see what kind of rights you have, what kind of, right to speech, right to. Wait till you get one of those that really want to just start using their baton right away, want to start ordering you and doing things that are against the law, against your rights. So it's how these people want to enforce these things. And as this conversation has gone along, black people, and that's not just in this country, this is
Right.
worldwide,
Yeah.
where we catch the brunt of everything that these countries do. It's always in something that they've got a deal over in the UK, and they're in all kind of trauma. I mean, they're in all kind of foolishness going on over there. And so now they look like they're gonna get this Hindu. A Hindu is gonna be the head of prime minister over there, and it's known that they don't care for blacks. I mean, it's known that he may just send everybody out of the country because so that he gains favor with where he's at. They have really those folks, like I saw in South Africa, how that hierarchy down there was so, which made me realize how worldwide this oppression thing is that they put on, make it so difficult for blacks to get footholds. And as soon as you get a foothold in something, here they come. Something's gonna come up. Something's gonna. So the civil rights, civil liberties, they're all great on paper, but when and how are they enforced? How can you exercise those rights? What does it take for you to hold them to the things that they say that they're going to do? And I think that's what has always been our task is to fight that battle.
Brother Williams.
Well, when I look at the two, I look at the deal when you talk about civil liberties holding a different level of magnitude than civil rights, because the civil liberties is based upon really what they were trying to refer to as the first uh, 10 amendments, which was, in 1791, whereas civil rights came along later. And so when you're looking at that, especially from the Bill of Rights standpoint, you're looking at a situation where the Constitution was referring to a group of people as being people, and another group later came along that was property, and now all of a sudden was given a certain level of rights to to bring them to the level of a acceptance of what the Bill of Rights was talking to. So when the fact that they had to create the 13th Amendment to address the abolishment of slavery is changing the status of a group of people to now be included within the Constitution. But that does not really raise you to the same level of what the Constitution really considered to be those people that it represented. And as a result of that, when you deal with a civil rights violation as opposed to civil liberties violation, you're going to be down to a minority group as opposed to dealing with civil liberties. It affects everybody as a whole. So obviously, from that standpoint, you would get a more of a fight on your hands if you're actually able to show the government versus the people, as opposed to the government fighting or addressing a violation of a minority group of people as something is applied or as something is applied across the board. This is why racism is able to obviously weed and navigate and duck and dodge throughout everything because it's held up through through corporate America. It's held up through capitalism. It's held up through progress of how things are institutionalized in terms of racism. Whereas it's not necessarily the government, but it's the people that run the world or the people that are in positions of power when we talk about again the small percentage of those that control the masses of the wealth. So from that standpoint, it has a trickle down effect. This is why former George Donald Trump, I'm sorry, Donald Trump was able to speak power to when he tried to draw out the quote unquote middle class by appealing to quote unquote the average blue collar white person as being middle class and making it appear as though it is those foreigners that are taking away your jobs. It is the lower class that are taking, that are reaping the benefits of being on welfare, that are taking away your access to proper living wages. And so when you're able to draw those kind of distinctions and create that kind of fight amongst the people, then obviously civil liberties are higher caliber than civil rights because now you're affecting the mass of the people. So when I look at that, it's just a political game that's being played to try to pin one against the other. But civil liberties obviously holds more weight than a civil right because it was before, and it addressed all of those quote unquote people that formed the nation as opposed to those who were considered property who later on got classified as being on a level of having equal access. But equal access does not mean uh, equal accountability, nor does it mean that you will be or treated the same across the board because it wasn't written that way. It's true when people say when it in terms of fighting imperialism that in essence the Constitution will have to be written all over again because if something was wrong, and we can take this right back to the whole Bible. In my opinion, when you talk about how the Protestants separate themselves from the Catholics, the the Christian religion was built off of Catholicism. Period. So later on, when you come along and you reform it, if you're reforming a lie, if you're reforming something that was hijacked, you're making it have a better appearance, and you're suppressing the heritage of what it was just in order to make it more modernized and fit a larger group of people and appeal to a larger group of people and have that message more universal. But the essence of the foundation from what it was built upon oppression. And so if the Constitution was built upon oppression and you want to try to, look over that part, but then address the later on amendments and then address how things can be applied across the board and then try to create legislation to address that. The bottom line is at any point you can come along and snatch up the aspects that brought a class of people to the quote unquote same level of those that created the document.
As Robert's saying, this country was built on civil liberties as an example of the Constitution and Bill of Rights. Whereas later on, civil rights came into play. And as I remember, the first civil rights law came in, and we mentioned it way back when we were talking about the sports fellow, was like 1088 or something like that, having to do with giving everybody and filtering in blacks. Also, the um, the right for property to have property and businesses, equal access to some of what Robert was saying. So, uh, and I think a lot of people mix the two
Hmm.
or don't distinguish the two, and you don't really a lot of times in mixing the two, I thought as Mr. Scott was speaking, mixing the two, a lot of times you don't realize that until you hit the courts. You go to court for various things, and then that's when the legalities come into play with whatever you're dealing with, whether
Well,
you've
speaking
got
of the
liberties.
courts, speak, speaking of the courts, there's I read something the other day where the great Yee and Candace Owens have joined forces, and it looks like there could be a lawsuit. The George Floyd family suing Kanye about some remarks. And personally, the George Floyd thing, I've just about had it with it. I mean, people are
The,
in jail where
the
they should
statement
be.
the statement that was made, Mr. Scott, was that the cop didn't even have his knee on George Floyd's neck like that.
Well, that was one of the statements, wasn't it? It was also something about
That
other causes of his death.
yeah, that it was the use of fentanyl that was the cause for his death, and that the cop didn't have his knee on his neck like that. So he insinuated that the cause of George Floyd's death was his use of fentanyl and not the man's knee on his neck. But now, Mr. Scott and Miss Sims, there was something that I think I'm going to give you an apology for because I saw something today on YouTube, and it was a Candace Owens interview, and you had another minister from the community, Reverend Katutu or something like that. I believe he was from one of the African communities. Said he had been there for uh, 27 years, but they took a uh, tour down through the George Floyd Square, and you can watch this on YouTube. And um, I was amazed. There was a sign uh, about this being an independent community. There was also a shrine, with different people bringing uh, different gifts and showing how the community had been closed off. But there are some other things that weren't addressed. Uh, but they did manage to talk about George Floyd's character, which to me it was a black life lost, regardless of the circumstances, and it's something that shouldn't be tolerated. But I also see the frustration that the residents of that community may have because it does look like a war zone, even 2 years after, however long it's been. But like I said, I also think that some of those problems started before George Floyd's death, and we have to look at the bigger picture now. Uh, I'm not saying that you go down and you bulldoze the neighborhood, but I do think, and Miss Sims, you always talk of this about the different meetings that they have within the neighborhood, but how there doesn't seem to be anyone in charge. It was also addressed about the 92 or so $1 million that was taken out of your city. So I do see the frustration, and I do see that it's going to take some time. But are these part of the seeds of dissension that drives the community further apart instead of bringing them together, Mr. Scott? And how do we do that? How do we build that bridge?
That's
First, let me first
they,
let me acknowledge first let me acknowledge that Mrs. Scott is the one that actually has gone there and seen the area, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe somewhere along the line I have contributed some of the things that you said, but he's the one that's been very diligent and gone to the direct meetings in regards to to that area. And I want to be clear on that to
well, no,
even know that
I
he's
mean, I
doing.
just attended the meeting Saturday at a
Mm,
park, and what they're doing is putting up a vision, and they're saying what we want, what does the community want, and they had these pictures, and you could talk to these
yeah,
people. And there was a guy there that actually has taken over that area. The guy, a friend of mine, he knows he hangs around up there, and he tells me what's going on up there. This guy he calls himself Mississippi, and supposedly he's in charge. I don't know where he came from, but he's up there policing the area, and do not go up there in the evening. I mean, I passed by there. It was just getting dark one night.
mm,
They have a makeshift roundabout right at the spot there on 38th Street. I went around it, and a car stopped in front of me, so I couldn't go. And then another car came to my other side, left of me, and the two guys in that car got out and started walking over to my car. I'm like, what in the world is this? So I just eased around them and sped off. But when they call it the free state or whatever, the police don't even go there anymore. They do not patrol that area. They don't even go in there. See, and so it is so disrespectful to the neighbors. That's a neighborhood where people have lived there for many years around there. But right there on that corner now, it's just nothing but blight. It's the type of thing you just, I mean, people have occupied the gas station, and they're in there, staying in there. People say you can go up there and get any drug or anything you want. You just go right up there. And it's not patrolled. People have gotten shot there. Now I live maybe, guys, I'm gonna say 4 blocks, less than a mile from there. I walk up there. Well, a couple of weeks ago, they find a body just right around the corner, just laying
mm,
there. And so there's a spillover from that area. There's a spillover from that, and it needs to be fixed in a lot of different ways. I think they really need the Cub Foods thing has been a problematic for years. And so I went on the tax rolls to see who's the owner of Cup Food, so I can see, what can I mean, because they have money, they can do whatever they want to refurbish the neighborhood. Well, I go on the tax rolls, and it's 3759 Chicago Avenue South. No information about it whatsoever. Nothing. No name, no owner, nothing. So that tells me something is going on there, and that these meetings, they pretty much have probably already decided what they're going to do. But
yeah,
they're bringing people in to say, see, we talked to you. We brought everybody in. And so, but it still sits the same, and it is deteriorating. Businesses closing, people
yeah,
selling their houses, getting out of here. It's, and they had another
yeah,
meeting
yeah.
tonight, and they said they're going to have meetings until the summertime. And they have been meeting, this will be 3 years coming up May.
Mm,
3 years.
yeah.
And you know,
James, I think I sent you, James, some of the meetings that Mr. Scott's talking about, that the city council
Yeah,
is out there
yeah,
doing and dragging on and on in regards to. I agree with Mr. Scott in regards to something is going on beneath the surface in regards to what's really going on and I think the city council may have to do some legal meetings and with the community, et cetera, to satisfy that mode of it. Then when that's completed, then the real deal's gonna come out and wipe out, ready to write Wall Street's working. That's a better way of putting it. Wall Street is working underneath the uh the surface in regards to money coming in, people coming in with money, and a lot of it's gonna be. I think a lot of the neighborhoods gonna be taken over by not the neighbors of the people that's living there now. Because when Wall Street comes in, they're not going to tolerate a lot of the stuff that Mr. Scott's describing how the community has deteriorated, because they wouldn't be able to make money in Wall Street's
well,
main issue is to make money.
see,
but
the government here is so disorganized. I mean, the last election they had something on the ballot. First, they wanted to defund the police. That's the first thing, and then that just got shut down. And then you know, so and then they had another thing on the ballot to make the mayor a strong mayor, be the leader of the city. Well,
Yeah.
now the city council people don't like that. They say
Hmm.
that no, he shouldn't be able to say. And instead of those 13 people focusing on the 13 areas that they were elected to serve, they're trying to worry
Yeah,
about how they can run the whole thing and be. So the
yeah,
whole thing is so disorganized and it's so disjointed. Then they bring in this guy, this Cedric Alexander, who I've met, and he's a guy who's been around. He was in St. Louis with the Michael Brown thing. He was down in Atlanta for a while. They brought him up here, and he's supposed to be a safety manager over everything. And so, the heck, he tells you, look, I've never been to Minneapolis before. You know, you guys have to tell me what you want this city to be. And they're like, they hire him and he's going to take care of it. He's
hmm,
Batman. He's just going to come in here and do the work that they haven't been
yeah.
doing all these years.
Right. They expect
let me,
him to be the savior of us all, and
Yeah.
coming in, and he's saying, "I can't be your savior until I know what's going on.
And he'll
What do
take the
you want me to save you
300,000.
from?"
He'll
but
take the 300,000, you know, but what
Yeah.
but, brother Williams, see, my problem with this is okay. I left Newark in 1972. Some of the places that were burned down in the 60s are still in the same state that they were back in the 70s. You can go to Detroit and see where those neighborhoods haven't been built up. I can go to St. Louis and show you where those neighborhoods haven't been built up since the 70s or at least the 80s. So, Brother Williams, why should we expect something different in the city of Minneapolis? They haven't been taking care of us in all these years, and we've been tolerating it.
I think it just goes back to what what we call capital interest from that standpoint. If there's some way to, when the time comes around for gentrification and that plays a role, then it will have more of an impact. But what I see going on, and I'm not on the ground, Anthony, so I can't. It's all I can do is speculate. But what I speculate is a tactic which has more so to do with counterintelligence and how you can potentially bring in people to control something and make sure that the powerful narrative does not ever happen. And I just feel like that's what could be taking place. And one of the things that happens as a result of that is that the message gets lost in the sauce, so to speak, which to me goes back to us addressing the fact that we need to empower ourselves. But in saying that we need to empower ourselves, we can't just jump out there with our emotions. Going back to what you
Right.
talked about defunding the police, and have a narrow perspective on how social engineering works as a whole. And I think that's part of the problem, is that people
Yeah.
look at one narrow bandwidth of what they see, as opposed to all of the different infrastructural things that come into it. And to me, I can just simply start with the amount of work that goes into the 911 dispatch. That's just, we can just stop right there.
Yeah.
When there's a problem that comes in, that dispatch is able to handle and decipher and disseminate that right away to a department, obviously the police department, and get something done, or something, worked on right then and there. When you talk about defunding the police, now you have to start breaking down what all types of services the police are involved in. And
Hmm.
now, do we have an element that is financially as well as infrastructurally able to handle, first and foremost, the communications level that's involved in the event of an emergency, in the event that you need some type of service that obviously involves the police department. And so people simply just look at it as it applies to the the primary crimes that take place, as opposed to all of the different elements again that make up the infrastructure that keeps that in place, as well as obviously the justice system. So from that standpoint, when we call ourselves wanting to dismantle or remove any element, we have to be able, willing, and capable, all three things: able, willing, and capable, to replace it. And that takes accountability, that takes infrastructure in
Yeah.
itself, that takes preparation, that takes an entire system ourselves that we have to have in place. And you don't just overnight create something like that. It has to be worked on as from a
Yeah.
foundational level. And you start with the communications infrastructure, and then you start getting around as a end product to the actual people that's running, that's doing the beat work. So the point is, by the time boots are on the ground, which will be the actual police officers, there's an entire infrastructure that has to be put in place, that has to be built up before you even get to that. So when someone gets upset, or they look at the aspect of police brutality, which goes into that specific individual whose job it is to quote unquote enforce in the community, they look at that in element, but don't look at the entire infrastructure that's been built up in this one person's abuse of power, as opposed to the whole institution's abuse of power, or negating power. Then we're not seeing what's really going on. We have to approach these things from a bird's eye view, and look at the overall thing that's happening, and look at what it takes to put ourselves in those positions. And all we're talking about really in essence is self-determination. So
Yeah.
when it applies to self-determination, we have to think about that across the board, not just one aspect of it, and look at and try to separate the police department from the criminal justice system, or the judicial system for that matter. So you can't just take away one element of it and expect things to all of a sudden get better. Because if they pull back, what happens? Going back to what you will see, they pull
Yeah.
back. Now
And
you
that's
left
what
to
we're
have to
seeing.
fend for yourself. Now you left to
Yeah.
fend for yourself without an infrastructure to support you fending for yourself. And then what do? Now you have to go crawling back to the same system that is abusive, the same
Yeah.
system that is dysfunctional, the same system that is unequally applying those civil liberties across the across the civil rights areas. And then you be like, then they're like, well, we gave y'all chance.
Yep. Yep. And I agree with the position that Robert's coming from. And he used a phrase a while ago that's really profound. It was social engineering.
Yep.
And that's behind a lot of things. People don't, I think maybe people don't even realize that there's such a thing as social engineering. And I think when last year when people were saying, talking about defund defund the police, they weren't thinking it through because in their minds, a lot of people and it can work that when you take money away from something, there's a there's usually a response, a positive response, etc., etc. But when you talk about defund the police, as Robert's saying, well, you got to think this thing through. You just don't. Just taking the money away isn't going to help the problem. You have to think, what are you going to replace it with? And when you defund the police, who's talking about, okay, if we defund the police, we got to defund the crime. The criminals aren't gonna stop while you get yourself ready, while you're in there getting ready to do something. The criminal element, that's an opportune time for
Well,
them to,
since
take over
crime has
and
gone
take
up,
charge more.
crime has gone up since that
Yeah.
slogan came out. I mean, police quitting. I mean, they're down at least 300 officers now.
Yeah,
And then
yeah, yeah.
both cities don't have a police chief. I'm going to say both cities. I'm talking about St. Paul, Minneapolis, two largest cities in the state. Now, Minneapolis supposedly just hired a police chief from Newark, New Jersey. Now, Newark has been an area that has been a difficult, challenging, I'll just use those words for this, a difficult, challenging area for generations. And so, what does that say? Does that say that's what we've become now? And then, so we're bringing in this person from Newark that's going to be our police chief now. And so, what is this going to really mean? And they've had some real interesting people be police chiefs here. They had Tony Boza from New York City. He was in New York City. He was there when Malcolm X died. He was the chief of police in New York. This guy knows a lot of stuff, and he came here and he was going to be the chief, and he left. He left under couldn't turn this thing around. Saw what was going on, and he got out. Had another good chief, Bill McManus, excellent chief. Same thing, couldn't break through the political climate, and they wouldn't let him discipline the officers. They wouldn't let him get
Mhm.
rid of people that he wanted to get rid of. So he went down to San Antonio 10 years and he's still down there. So we've had people here. We had citizens review boards. Oh, Ron Edwards, me, uh, Zach Matoya, a lot of community people, oversight. The next mayor said, no, we don't want that anymore. It's gone. We don't do that anymore. And so now they keep saying they're going to build it back and it's going to become, but it never goes to any fruition. It never goes to any fruition. And the George Floyd thing has just opened up pulled all the scabs off of all this stuff that's been going up here. 20 years ago when I started at 25 years ago, ended up in child protection. We worked with the police. We worked with the schools. We were assigned to all the different areas to find struggling families to provide services. Everything was right there. And this defunding and, well, what are you going to do with the money? They had no plan. They
There
never
you go.
said what the alternative was going to be. And it was on the ballot and it almost won. I mean, there was money pouring in here from all around the country to do this. It's like we were going to be an experiment to see if this would
Yeah.
really work. Fortunately, it didn't get on the ballot, but it's still a very dysfunctional type of arrangement here. And they have some new elections with some elections in November that are supposed to bring some new people. We'll see. But I mean, until they
And
make a
listen,
statement
Now,
on
yeah.
George
I,
Floyd, they have to
I,
make a statement on that. They have to
I,
change.
I, I've been one that has been calling for defunding of the police for the last 20 years. Now, when I say defund the police, I'm talking about the military weapons that the police have access to. There's no reason on God's green earth that the SWAT team here needs 3 tanks, 4 armored personnel carriers, plus a stockpile of weapons that were probably better than the ones that we used in Vietnam. Okay. So when I don't think that a young man that's involved in a domestic disturbance deserves to be killed. I think that when you talk about policing and policing the neighborhood, this is not the same policing that they did back when we were young kids, Miss Sims, or you when you were playing baseball, Mr. Scott, because things have changed. And instead of trying to grow and understand our community, what we do is put a fence around the community
Mm.
and try to block it in where they're much easier to control. So that's my definition of defunding the police, and I'll stand by it until I'm at least
But
101
James,
or whenever.
when you say just those two words, people's mind and understanding goes just towards the money part. They don't realize what you mean, and so
That's
when
why I
you say
explained
when you say
myself.
that's what I'm getting at. Are when you say that, are you explaining the manner and that you just did in regards to the weapons, etc., etc.? And I would not have associated the two in regards to just the way people use the word defund. Uh, they
Right.
they don't think of that the money is also funding these excessive weapons. They're thinking don't
Yeah.
doesn't go that far.
Well, I didn't say abolish. I said
I didn't say
defund.
that.
Well,
I
let
said
let
which means you divert those funds somewhere else. It does, you know, you like
I didn't use the word abolish either.
no, but as Mr. Scott was saying, and I've pointed out many times before, most of those 300 men that you have that aren't being replaced on your police force, at least according to your stats, were men that were in the administrative duties.
mm,
Why can't you take those 300 jobs and put those boots out on the ground where they can actually see, people can see them, people can see their presence, and maybe that would have more of an impact on the community than a young man being killed because he just woke up and didn't know who the hell was in his house.
Yeah, but the words create, so misunderstanding, as Ms.
right.
Sims was saying. I mean, you say defund, that says to some people, oh, they defunded police. Well, let's get out of here. Let's head over there for Milwaukee, Kenosha. Let's head over there. They're
Mhm.
defunding. I mean, so these words have, for example, child protection has a connotation when people hear that.
Oh yeah.
But when I did some seminars on child protection in places in different parts of the country, they didn't even call their thing child protection. They called it child welfare services. They called it
Right.
children's services, family services. They didn't even use the words child protection.
Yeah.
And so just that one little thing there can change the whole tenor of the way people look at what you're doing, because they're not really going into the communities and letting people know what this means when somebody knocks on your door. Child protection, people don't know, but you have rights. You don't have to let anybody, unless you've got a court order or anything, you don't have to do this. It's all voluntary. But these are things that, the words and the wording, it just really seem to match what they're really really doing and what people understand.
Let me add to this as well, because James, I would like to use this example. What I say in regards to what we're talking about is not defund the police, is demilitarize the police. Because the point being
Yeah.
is that the police are operating more like a paramilitary force within the community, and so therefore the community, they treat the community like a war zone. And so what we want to do is we want to demilitarize the police,
Yeah.
because as you demilitarize the police, that affects some of the type of weaponry that is being supplied to the police, the type of tactical gear, the type of electronics equipment, the type of small arms, all of that. Because keep in mind, just say we talk about defunding or taking away some of the money, that don't mean that they're going to automatically demilitarize, because what they do is they replace
Mhm.
boots on the ground with robots, and that's what they're doing
Drones.
anyway, and
Yeah.
drones, and which is more militarization, but guess what? Lower overhead. You see, so you can start working on ways to defund the police and take less boots off the ground, but yet make it more militaristic in its nature and its enforcement. So is we definitely got to draw a distinction between just simply talking about the funds and how the funds are allocated and how the technology as well as how
Yeah.
the police department itself, the culture of the police department. And that's what we're talking about. We want to demilitarize the police because the culture of the police department right now is
Hmm.
basically being at war with the community,
Yeah.
which the effects of that is what causes people to look at it and think that they tie that with the money as opposed to tying it with the culture.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so what we
And
have
I
to do
yeah.
is recognize that it is not the police department needs to not continue to be a safe haven for ex infantry, ex special forces. And that's kind of what we're dealing with because where do you take those life skills that you've learned at war and be able to apply those in the civilian sector, the police department? And
And I
so
think yeah.
go ahead, Sims.
I think just using that one word, demilitarize, people get it right away in terms of what you're speaking of, weapons, etc., versus using the word defund, because when you talk about weapons, people know what a weapon is. They think of war. They think of weapons that do mass destruction and things like that. So you get a response, and I like that word, demilitarize. People will get that right away.
Miss Sims, I'm gonna let you give us our last words for the night. So, Brother Anthony, why don't you start out and give us your final thoughts for the evening?
Well, um, I'm working on a couple of little campaigns up here. I'm really trying to check with all the George Floyd meetings and community things so that at least I can't say that I wasn't in attendance and try to do my part. So that's pretty much what's on my agenda for right now. And I really want this neighborhood. I got to decide if I'm going to stay here. I mean, because if they're not going to fix things up and get this thing back, I might have to just get a hat, and go somewhere else. But
What about Councilman Scott?
I
well,
like the sound of that.
we'll
There's a nice ring to it.
we'll there have been several overtures. Actually, there's a guy that is manager for the St. Paul mayor, and he did call me and asked me about running for mayor last time. And I
Mm-hmm.
said, well, I'd like to have more experience before I did something like that. But
You got more experience than 45, but that's another story.
Hey, but he's not rich. He's not a billionaire.
And he's not a genius. He's not claiming to be a genius.
well, I never really discussed my age, my sex life, or how much money I got. So
Well, we do know you had that palatial estate over there that Mr. Allen keeps talking about. So, maybe if when I needed, a landscaping job or something, maybe I can come up to Minnesota there. Yeah.
yeah, well, you don't want to come until May. You don't want me nowhere around here until May.
uh,
I need to
Brother
come your way,
Williams.
really.
Yeah. Hey, you're welcome. Come on out anytime. Brother Williams is out here too. You can get to meet Brother Williams.
Yeah, I welcome
Uh,
you. I take you around to some studios and let you see
Well, that sounds like a real winner. That sounds like a winner there.
let,
That
let
sounds
you
like a winner.
let you see some young artists playing instruments. Wow,
Oh,
blow your
oh,
mind.
oh, would love it. Would love it.
Hey, Tito's out here too, though, isn't he, Mr. Williams? Isn't Tito Jackson still out here?
I do
I,
not know.
I think Tito's still out here, and Al B. Shore, as a matter of fact, Mr. Scott. So, we can take you on both ends.
Well, I'm gonna leave I'll
uh,
be sure alone. I'm not gonna talk about that.
uh, go
All
ahead,
right.
Brother Williams. Your final thoughts for the evening.
Well, I like us to just really soak on the concept of what it means to be self-determined, what it means to be a community that is capable of actually holding its own self together. As black people, when we talk about our communities, we have to be able to recognize and see our communities being able to be self-sufficient in terms of each person holding themselves accountable for the well-being of the environment from which they live in. So when it comes to that, and let's go back to what I stated earlier, dealing with social engineering, we can't ask for something on one side and not be willing to deal with the sacrifices it takes in order to achieve those things. So as a people, if we want to be treated better, if we want true equality, then we have to be willing to step up to the mantle of power. Stepping up to the mantle of power meaning that we as a people are going to do whatever is necessary for us to be in power, in positions, and to control the dynamics of our community. And that basically means self determination. And if we're going to deal with self determination, we have to be able to deal with social engineering. We have to know what it takes to make an intact community, an intact environment. And we have to understand the balance of that. See, we're dealing with, when we talk about government and we talk about politics, most people only refer to think of politics, or should I say, not most people, but a lot of our people only see politics as voting, as opposed to looking at the entire infrastructure that runs the institution. What is government from that standpoint? Government basically means you're talking about the governance or the operation or the control of something, a vessel. So from that standpoint, we have to be able to see the entire operation. We have to be able to see the balance, the harmony that it takes from one type of government or one type of system that deals with another type of systems. There are called the things called checks and balances. If we don't understand what checks and balances are, then we're not able to even approach the concept of saying we want to defund something and not recognize how that affects and cascades against the entire other aspects or other systems that are in place. And so we have to really take a step back. And if we want to be involved in implementing power and implementing um, equality, be able to deal with everything that goes into an intact community, an intact environment. And that's going to take people really being able to buckle down and do their part, as opposed to pointing to and expecting someone else to do it, and then all think you have to do is vote for them. Because as long as we operate like that, you're going to get people that stand up who do not have your best interest
Hmm.
in hand to take up the mantle, because you are exchanging now freedoms for rights in that standpoint. And if we want to continue to give up our freedoms for government regulated rights, then that is the right course to go down. But you can't turn around and be upset about losing your freedoms and or quote unquote your civil liberties, and things getting relegated down to something that you have no control over, when you was willing to give those rights away, willing to give those freedoms away, simply because you didn't want to have to be involved. All you wanted to do is at the most deal with voting with for the quote unquote lesser of two evils. So I just urge people to be willing to do more in terms of getting involved in the fight, in the struggle, for us to gain a better foothold on what we're dealing with here in the United States and across the world. Be willing to step up to the plate of humanitarian, fighting for humanitarian rights and fighting for equality as it applies to that. And that means being a self-determined people. I'm done.
This taps into what Robert just said in terms of self determination, and you can't do it without. Oh, it's a big part of it is your political power, and
Yeah.
that's what I'm dealing with in terms of trying to get people to understand the totalness of it, not just voting someone in office and then walking away. They could be the one that can do the job, but they need you not to walk away. And one of the things that I'm doing along those lines is like in terms of being in touch with the Secretary of State's office and saying, listen, are there supposed to be when you go to a polling place, or I think politicians are doing a big disservice and not letting people know the various aspects that they are able to vote. You can vote here in Minnesota. You can vote if you live under a bridge. You can vote if you're off. If you're through with your paperwork on coming out of prison, you can when you go to the polls, you are able. If you're not able to read or write, or you need help in those aspects, you are able to have someone there to help you do those things. But if you don't know that there are people there that can assist you in doing that, you won't think of that. You won't even go to the polls. If you're disabled and can't get out of your car, there are people there to come out to the car where you are. If you live in a homeless shelter, there the people who run the homeless shelter can vouch for you and help you. You are still able to be allowed to vote. Things like that. That plays into letting people know and realize the power that they have in helping in self determination. So that's the things that I'm working on and trying to push ahead uh, at this point. And personally, I've done things that I hadn't been as involved in before. I've got a sign with Martha out in terms of Hennepin County out in my yard. I even donate. I never rarely donate to
Yeah, I
Stacey
hosted Martha.
Abrams.
I hosted Martha. We had a backyard.
Did you?
She
Did
came to
you?
the house.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I even donated to Stacey Abrams in regards to looking at the totality of the political thing. And so that's what I'm doing now, James. The end.
Hey, well, as always, glad having a talk with everyone, and look forward to having some more challenging discussions next week.
All right.
So, have a
Sounds
great
good.
night, everyone.
All right.
I'll
Call
see
the
you
people.
next Monday.
Good night. Peace and
Good night.
love. Good night.
Herschel's up. Check
You
the
did. You did. We did.
Herschel Walker campaign.
Oh man. All right, Mr. Scott. There you go talking about that. Talking about your guy. Now I told you,